Hey guys, welcome back to another video. As you can see, the layout of this video is not very conventional because today is a special video, and it is basically outlining 8 steps you need to follow to get an 800 in math. And we have some experience because me personally, I am a 790 scorer, and my friend that co-runs the channel, you may have seen him in other videos, he is an 800 scorer. So we do have some experience in this area. And throughout our whole SAT math practicing process, we learned a few tips that we like to share with you guys and and a few tricks that will hopefully make your practicing journey more successful and more efficient so you can go get that 800. I know y'all can do it. So the first step is to always check your answers. So obviously, you may be saying, well, obviously, I always check my answers, blah, 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 blah. But here are some more in-depth tips that you may not have thought of that are fit into this category of checking your answers. So firstly, you should remember that questions get progressively harder, but as the test goes along, so obviously question 1 is going to be much more easier than question 27 in the section 4 of the math, in section 4 of the SAT. But you have to remember that the difficulty resets in the beginning of the student-produced responses. So if you think, uh, so an example of applying this checking your answers principle would be, let's say you see a question and the answer seems so obvious, but it's question 3, right? That's really situation where you wouldn't really check your answers. I mean, obviously you would kind of like look over it, but you wouldn't be suspicious about it because it's in the beginning of the packet and easy questions obviously go in the beginning of the section. Whereas if you had, I don't know, a question 29 had a suspiciously easy answer, you'd always want to look back to the question and see what it's asking because usually questions that are um, further into the packet are always harder. While this might not always be the case, it usually is the case, so just pay attention to that. Also, don't another thing I have for checking your answers is I know a lot of you guys like to check your answers like over and over and over again, but remember that this is a time test, especially on the section 3, no calculator. The time constraints are pretty tight, especially for people who are not very familiar with math. So don't get all caught up in checking your answers and always make sure to leave time for other questions. And one way to just solve this problem is to time yourself simply. And so the second tip I want to give is to underline what you solve for. Underline what you solve for. All right, so what do you mean by underline what you solve for? Well, let's say an example of this would be, say, a question that asks you, what is the diameter of a circle? Well, you want to underline the diameter of a circle, and you want to always emphasize, you want to maybe draw a couple lines underneath it because sometimes the College Board test makers know that you are probably going to solve for the radius and forget to multiply the radius by 2 to get the diameter, which is the answer that the test wants you to get, um, and you end up just putting the radius. So yeah, always remember to underline what you need to solve for because you know your units might not be right, and it just overall just provides clarity to your test and just eases your test taking experience. Number three, practice smart. And this is a pretty vague statement, but I'll go more in depth into it. So, what I mean by practicing smart is to take practice tests, but don't just take them. Whatever you get wrong, I know this might seem tedious, But whatever you get wrong, you should look thoroughly at the question. Why did you get it wrong? And what can you do to improve next time? Don't just look over and say, okay, I got that wrong. Because that is the number one reason why a lot of people don't improve is because they don't see the obvious flaws that they have and they say, oh, that's a stupid mistake. But you always want to internalize what you did wrong and you want to kind of drive whatever you get wrong conceptually into your head. You want to like really drill it in. So if you let's say if you get I don't know multiple problems wrong on I don't know system of equations, you want to I don't know download and print a CUDA software worksheet on a system of equations because that's obviously what you're struggling on. And the another tip in the category of practicing smart is to always time yourself because you know timing yourself is the like I said before the ultimate way of making sure you're on pace for the actual exam. My fourth tip is to remember that skilled test takers can struggle because test takers purposefully try to trick you. So going back to the point in number one, a lot of the SAT test takers, they purposely make trick questions or trick solutions to obviously to trick the student into picking these answers. And just knowing this inside will give you like a sixth sense, I would have to say, and always being wary of, any of these tricks that these test takers might use. And there are some examples, but I can't really think of any off the top of my head. I'm sure, but there are. I'm sure you encountered a bunch of them too. And number five is to start from the easy questions up. So this is especially, I guess, relevant to people who are taking the SAT in maybe like a couple of weeks or under a very small amount of time they have to cram for stuff. Because realistically speaking, guys, you're not going to get an 800 if you just started studying if you started studying with 1 week left until the SAT. You really want to set your standards realistically. So what I say is if you're in that type of position, just nail the easy questions down and just progressively work harder so you can at least master one thing. You can get the easy points down. And if you do bad, it's fine because you can always take it again unless you're, I don't know, like a senior in October, which I'm assuming most of you aren't. So you can always retake it again and you just want to hammer the fundamentals down and continually build up from there. You don't want to do the opposite because that just generally just going to confuse you. And my sixth tip is be confident. Wow, this is actually connected to my fifth tip. But just be confident because just going in the test, you don't have to, it's not the end of the world. I know you've probably heard this a lot, but it really isn't that bad. I've taken the SAT maybe twice, and once you get in the rhythm of it, it's not as bad as it seems. And even if you get a bad score, you can always take it again, unless, like I said before, you're like a senior in the middle of the fall or winter waiting for trying to submit college apps. Obviously, that's not going to work out, but for most of you guys, you can always take it again. And number seven is write out every step. Now, this tip may be controversial as it might not apply to everybody, but the general gist of it is when you're solving an equation, always write out each step that you're doing. So if the answer is wrong, or especially in student produced response sections, and you don't get an answer, like let's say you get a negative in the free response section, then you obviously want to go back into your work and see what's wrong. So always try to stay organized with what you're doing so you can easily identify errors in your mistakes and your easily identify errors in your work. Um, and my eighth and final tip is to remember formulas. So, and also remember you have a reference sheet. So, obviously, College Board gives you a reference sheet, which is helpful, but it doesn't contain a lot of useful formulas. And for example, they don't give you the quadratic formula, which is something you probably need. And you also don't get the circle formula, which is the whole x minus h, I think, squared. I don't really remember it, which is kind of contradicting my point, but yeah, you want to generally have those memorized so you can kind of use those when you need them. But also remember that you don't have to memorize everything. Just memorize the core ones that are not on the reference sheet. And you generally kind of want to know a little bit about the reference sheet because if you just go in the test not knowing anything that's on the reference sheet, you're going to be constantly referring back to it, which is time consuming. So you want to have a general gist. You obviously don't have to memorize it like a lot of people say, but you just want to have, a basic understanding of what's gonna, how things work. Basically, don't be dumb. Um, and yeah, so that was 8 steps to an 800. Hopefully that helped you in your SAT practicing journey. And thank you for watching as always, and I'll see you later.